Well, good morning. It is good to share with you today. And for those of you who have been here for the last year, the North Lobby and the corridor and the restrooms are just such exciting fruit of that On Mission initiative. And it's so cool to see all of that coming together. And Christmas Eve, we're going to be walking through the front doors and just really anticipating that. Well, as Kevin said, my name is John. I get to serve here as the executive pastor, and it's a joy to be a part of the staff. When Kevin talked to me and he said, "Hey, John, I want you to open up that first week of the series On Mission," I was like, are you sure that you want me to open up that first week of this refresher On Mission series? And he said, yes. And I was actually really excited because when we think about the mission, I have a heartbeat for the mission of the church. And I'm sure many of you are this way, but I have always wanted the churches that I have been a part of to make a difference in this world. I've longed for our churches to be intentional and strategic with what we do. And honestly, that's a large part of why I do what I do on staff as the executive pastor. You know, Kevin often refers to me as the detail guy, and I think he does that because if the details go bad, he can blame me. But he often talks about me as the detail guy, and the truth is, the details wear me out. When I think about the things I do in my job, I read and send a lot of emails. For every email that I read and I send out, it feels like 7 more of them come back. I think that's the 2024 version of the demons that Jesus talked about. When 1 goes out, 7 comes back. Little Bible joke there. I review church policy. It's sort of like editing a dictionary. It's really enjoyable. I review financial numbers and projections. I do really love spreadsheets, so I don't complain about that part of the job. I review bills to be paid. I think about our church budget. You would be amazed at how much money we spend on donuts and coffee every week. But every dollar is worth it, right? Yes, for those donuts and coffee. Wrestle with health insurance renewals. I prepare for meetings, and on the details of church life goes. At the end of the day, I cannot do those details if it's not connected to the mission, because my passion isn't managing the church. My passion isn't managing details of church life. My passion is for people to come to know a God that deeply loves and cares about them. And if caring for the details of the mission helps that to happen, if it helps someone come to know Jesus, then I am all in on the mission. I remember in my first staff meeting here at College Church, Kevin asked me to introduce myself to the staff. And after I shared my name and a little bit about myself, I just kind of made the bold statement. And I said, you know, if our church is about playing church, just going along with the motions, I can't do that. I'm out on that. But if we're gonna be a people that are about leading people to Jesus, I am in on that all day long. And I still feel that way today. This passion for the church and the mission has been with me for most of my life. But honestly, it grew a lot when I was a teenager. I remember going to high school and having a number of friends and peers and classmates whose lives were very, very messy. And I longed for my church to meet my friends where they were at, to tell them about Jesus and to help point them to a transformed life. I tried to share my faith with my friends, and I had the opportunity to pray with a few football teammates in high school. I had the opportunity to invite several to church, but I longed for a church that would come alongside of me and help me in accomplishing that mission. You see, years later, I came across a picture and an understanding of the church that I had been longing for, and there's an image that'll come up on the screen. On one end, you can see a continuum that begins low invitation at the bottom and high invitation at the top. This line represents evangelism, or leading people into a relationship with Jesus Christ. There's another continuum. On the left, you see low challenge, and on the right, you see high challenge. This represents our call to lay down our lives for Jesus, to embrace his way. We might call that discipleship. You see, what's so interesting to me is that when churches make decisions about how inviting they will be and how challenging they will be, they are building a culture. And so let's think real quick about the cultures we might build. If you're a church that's low challenge but high invitation, you're likely building a cozy culture. People in that church feel comfortable because they're not challenged. Little transformation happens in that culture. You might label that quadrant as the consumer quadrant. If you're a part of a church that's low challenge and low invitation, you're probably building an apathetic culture. Not much is happening in that church. It could feel directionless. This could be labeled as the boring quadrant. And if you're a part of a church that's high challenge but low invitation, this usually creates a discouraged culture because everyone is working very hard, but there's not much of an outward focus. You could call it the stressful quadrant. And then lastly, if you're a church that's both high challenge and high invitation, you develop an empowered culture. All are welcome to join the church and all are challenged to experience a transformed life in Jesus. You could label this as the discipling quadrant. You see, I found this simple diagram to be really helpful as I think about the kind of church that I want to be at, as I think about the filter for how I think about my own life. You see, I want to be a person, a follower of Jesus, that is both high invitation and high challenge. I want to be a part of a church that is high invitation and high challenge, mostly because that's who I understand our God to be. Our God is a God of high invitation and high challenge. When I read the Bible and I consider the whole story of Scripture, that's who I see God. I see an intentional God that is continually inviting and is inviting folks into a relationship with Him, challenging those people to lay down their lives and to trust Him. You see, in the life and the ministry and the teaching of Jesus, we see a God who is high invitation, who is high challenge. He talked to the disciples and He said, "Come, follow me." And He said, "Take up your cross daily." The invitation, the challenge, it's all rooted in a God who is relational, who is intentional, a God who thoughtfully, purposefully, and intentionally created the world and everything in it. When sin entered the world, we know that God responded with a rescue plan to restore people to a right relationship with Him, with each other, with creation. We call this God's mission. And the entire Bible is best understood as read through this mission of God. And here's the amazing part. God invites us, the church, to be a part of His mission, to be a people of invitation and challenge. And so today, I want to think about us. I want to think about College Church. And I want to think about how can we be a church that is on mission in this world for God. And we're going to walk through our mission statement, and I am totally biased. I think our mission statement fits very well with the mission of God. Pastor Kevin already said it, but it goes like this. Our mission is to lead every generation into a growing relationship with Jesus so that all might experience God's goodness and grace. That first part of our mission statement, leading people into a relationship with Jesus, that's the evangelism part. In this church, we share the good news about God and how people can have a relationship with Him. In the Bible, Paul writes about this in 2 Corinthians 5. For God was in Christ reconciling the world to Himself, no longer counting people's sins against them. And He gave us this wonderful message of reconciliation. So we are Christ's ambassadors. God is making His appeal through us. We speak for Christ when we plead, "Come back to God." For God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. Paul mentions a lot of concepts in those short verses, but he is saying that through Jesus, God's mission was lived out. Jesus showed us what God looked like, and He made a way to God through His sacrifice on the cross. And now, as followers of Jesus, we have the responsibility to tell other people about what Jesus did for them and how they can have a relationship with Him. And Paul uses that word ambassador in that passage. When you think of ambassador, maybe you think of a government official, a United States government official living in another land, an embassy and a flag, and maybe barricades and guards. But if you read the New Testament, you know that Paul doesn't have a protection mindset. He's not thinking of an ambassador hidden away in an embassy on a foreign land. Paul is thinking of an ambassador as a missionary. The definition of ambassador goes like this: an accredited diplomat sent by a country as its official representative to a foreign country. When you combine the idea of a missionary, you might say, we are approved by God to represent him in this world. We are called to proclaim God's love and his goodness and invite people to be a part of God's family who are not a part of God's family right now. This is a vital part of what it means to be a church on mission in this world. Several years ago, I was thinking about this idea of how we as a church might be on mission for God, and I was studying and reading, and specifically this idea as the church as a missionary church in culture. And I remember talking with my mom. It was really fun because she was a missionary kid. She grew up in Colombia, South America, and my uncle is a missionary in Brazil, South America. And as I spoke with mom, I said, what's it like to be a missionary somewhere else? What do you do? And she said, John, you as a missionary, you go in first as a student of the culture that you're in. For her family, they were students of Colombia and its culture. They learned the language, they learned the customs, they learned the values. Not everything in the culture was good. They identified some things in the culture that needed correction, but they came as students of the culture first. And once they had learned the language and the values, they could speak truth to that culture. You see, sometimes I think the church in America comes in arrogantly. We don't think we need to learn the culture around us. We don't think we need to know the language. We know the truth, and so we expect the world to meet us on our terms. But I don't believe that's who God has called the church to be. God calls us to be students of the culture around us so that we can accurately relate the truth to the culture we find ourselves in. So missionaries learn the culture they find themselves in, but they also stand out from the culture around them. They embody a different set of values and priorities by the way they live. My mom's family was from England, and if you don't know this about England, the sun doesn't shine there. So they're super white, pasty, marshmallow white people. And when they were in Colombia, they stood out. Colombian people would be like, there's the white people from England that are missionaries. But they also stood out for a different reason. They stood out because of their manner of life, the way they carried themselves in the society, in public, the way they made decisions, the way they loved others. They stood out for Jesus. You see, missionaries represent God, and we stand out in the culture where we live. When we think about the church, being this missionary church to the world, the way we live, it matters. Our character and the message of God's love are intertwined. If something about our lives is not in tune with God's love, it's not in tune with God's mission, then the message gets muddied. We cannot separate our lives from the message. The way we live matters. Christians often refer to this as our public witness. The way we live ought to reinforce the message of the gospel, not contradict it. And so if we're going to be a church on mission, if we're going to invite everyone to experience the love of God, we're going to need to embrace that identity as a missionary, as an ambassador. We're going to need to learn the language of the culture, but we're also going to need to stand apart in the culture we find ourselves in. My family and I served at a church in Illinois for a little over 6 years with Pastor Kevin. And one of my friends there, his name was Josh. And Josh was a guy I really looked up to. Josh was a wind turbine technician. He loved playing basketball. He loved to fish. He was married and had 3 kids. The thing I so admired about Josh is that he viewed each one of these aspects and facets of his life as an opportunity to proclaim the good news, as an opportunity to invite others into a relationship with Jesus. So whether he was at work, or he was playing basketball, or he was fishing, or he was hanging out with another family with young kids, Josh was always considering and thinking about, how can I invite this person to come to know Jesus? Josh was always talking about names of people And he was always inviting me to pray, to be prepared to see a person at church that he was working on and inviting to come to know Jesus. You see, Josh, his primary identity wasn't his job, it wasn't his hobbies, it wasn't his relationship. His primary identity was as a follower of Jesus. He viewed himself as a missionary, an ambassador wherever he went. Church, what would that look like if each one of us took on that identity as a missionary, as an ambassador to the culture around us, that we would be people of high invitation, saying everyone is welcome at College Church. We want everyone to meet God, to start a relationship with him. May God help us to be a people of high invitation. The second line of our mission statement goes like this, and it could be understood as the challenge line. We don't expect folks to just start a relationship with Jesus. We expect them to have a growing relationship with Jesus. We know that God meets us where we're at. He brings us into his family, and he helps us grow from there. Colossians 2 goes like this, and now, just as you accepted Christ Jesus as your Lord, you must continue to follow him. Let your roots grow down into him, and let your lives be built on him. Then your faith will grow strong and the truth you were taught, and you will overflow with thankfulness. You see, Paul realized even 2,000 years ago that some people might be tempted to think that the journey was done after they started a relationship with Jesus. They might begin to think that it is over. And Paul encourages them, and he says, you must continue to follow him. We know this, that a relationship with Jesus is not a one-time decision. It is a daily decision, a lifetime endeavor that continues after death. As a senior in high school, I remember getting this vision for my future life. I had a thought that I might find myself someday in a punk rock band. And so I committed to that vision. I can't sing, I can't keep a beat, so I thought I'd learn the guitar. So I bought a guitar, I started taking lessons. I actually practiced every day. I grew out my hair. It was only 3 inches long, but that's me with growing out hair. I bought a pair of American flag Converse shoes. They were really cool. And I started, going to punk rock concerts in the weekends, Christian ones, in smelly church basements and mosh pitting. And it was awesome. But after about 3 months, I realized I wasn't very good at the guitar. And I was kind of tired of the mosh pits and the bruises and all that. And so I traded the punk rock scene for the spreadsheet life, and things have never been different. But when I had that vision for my life, as an 18-year-old, even though it was a short-lived vision, I changed how I used my time. I changed who I spent my time with. I changed the way I used my money, the community that was around me, where I went, and what I valued. You see, the reality is that when we follow Jesus, we adopt a new lifestyle. We have a relationship with God that now means something. It means something new, something different for our time, for our money, for our relationships. We don't simply start that relationship with Jesus and keep living our old way of life. Jesus said this to his disciples. He said, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? You see, to be in a growing relationship with Jesus means to deny our ways of life and to take up his, to surrender our desire for control, to surrender our desire for comfort, to surrender our desire to be seen as significant in this world, and to embrace the Jesus way of life. One of the core values here at College Church is to cultivate Christ-likeness. And the key to that is living surrendered to God and what he wants to do in your life. So you may say, how does this fit with being a church that is high challenge? Well, certainly We can tell people about this with words. We can describe what it means for your character to be shaped so that it looks more and more like Jesus. We can talk to people about how we have denied ourselves, how we have taken up our cross, and how God has shaped our lives. But I would say the most effective way to challenge this world to lay down their lives and take up the life of Jesus is to model it for them. Growing up, my dad was a wonderful example of denying himself, following Jesus, and living that in front of others. My dad was a generous man. He didn't have a lot of money, but he was generous with his time and with his possessions. There's a famous story in our family of dad loaning out one of our cars to another family in the church who didn't have a vehicle that week and needed a vehicle to be able to get to work. It wasn't a big deal because we had 2 cars in the family, and so he was glad to do that and thought we would be okay with our 1 car. The problem was that dad forgot that he had already loaned out the 2nd car to another family that needed it that week. When he realized the problem and he and my mom had a conversation about what they might do, dad and mom decided to go rent a car so that our family could get around that week, and no, it was not a nice car. But you see, this is just an example, and it was a model for me of a dad who said, I'm gonna lay down every possession I have. My whole life, my whole being, everything I have is God's. I have laid down my life for Jesus, and I had taken up his way of life. You see, as a church, we challenge people not just to begin a relationship with Jesus, but to have a growing relationship with him. And we use words to tell them what that means, but we also model it with our very lives. We say to the world, real life isn't found in fighting for what you want. Real life is found when you lose your life for Jesus, when you lay down your dreams and your hopes and you take up the life that Jesus has for you. Man, may we be a church that is high challenge. Invitation, challenge, leading every generation into a growing relationship with Jesus. You see, I think that's what God wants us to do in this world. And the reason we do this so that every person could experience God's goodness and grace, that they could experience a life that they've longed for, but they've never been able to achieve. You know, we want to be a church on mission. And a church on mission impacts people all around them. The hopeless begin to find hope. Those without purpose find God-given purpose. Those with despair find joy. When the church goes on mission, people experience a good and beautiful life that they had not previously experienced. And here's the reality. When you and I experience something good in our lives, we can't help but share it. We become enthusiastic about it. We want to tell everyone about the good thing that we experienced. And the best thing that you have ever experienced in your life is a relationship with Jesus Christ. I remember as a teenager being in my room, crying out to God in my own despair. I had learned about God. I knew the stories about God. The church had been faithful to teach me about God. But in my room, crying out to God, he became real. That which was an idea became a reality. And my life hasn't been the same since. The rest of my life has been about trying to tell other people, you can experience the same goodness and the same grace from a God who loves you. You can find hope. You can find purpose. You can have joy. The Bible tells us this in Psalm 107. It says, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. Has the Lord redeemed you? Then speak out. We have a responsibility, we have an obligation to share the goodness of God that we've experienced. Several years ago, I was in a small group, and that group was all ages and stages of life and faith. And a few years into that group, people got really comfortable sharing about what God was doing in their life, what he had done past, present, and what they hoped he would do in the future. We had just a kind of a public testimony that was ongoing every week. We would just share about how God had worked in our lives and what we were hoping he would continue to do in our lives. And after a couple of years, someone spoke up, a member of the group, and that person said, you know, when I joined this group, I wasn't a Christian. I actually was filled with doubts. I couldn't put all the pieces together. But today I can say without a doubt that I am a follower of Jesus. I honestly don't know when I began that relationship with Jesus, but I do know why I began that relationship, and it's because of you. You shared your life, and you showed me God's goodness, God's grace through the stories that you shared and the ways that you lived. It was an amazing night in our small group. You see, there's people around us in your neighborhood, in your family, in your house, at your work, that need to hear the story of God's faithfulness in your life. They need to hear how God has provided for you, how God met you at a point of need. There's people all around us looking for hope, looking for purpose. And we get to share with them that they can find hope and purpose in Jesus. They can experience God's goodness and grace. Our mission at College Church is to lead every generation into a growing relationship with Jesus so that all might experience God's goodness and grace. May he help us to be a church of high invitation and high challenge. Here in a few moments, we're going to receive communion together. And as I was thinking about this message, I just felt impressed by really just one thought. For us to be able to be a culture and a church of invitation and challenge, we first have had to accepted that invitation. And maybe you're here today, you've never started a relationship with Jesus. Today, right now, you can say yes. You can begin a relationship with Jesus in this moment. You can say yes to the invitation that he has given you. Maybe for some of you today, God has put his finger on something in your life, something you've been holding on to too tightly, a place that you haven't laid down for him yet, something, maybe a hope, maybe a dream that you continue to hold on to. And God is saying, I'm challenging you today to lay that down so that you can find new life, more life in me. Communion is a wonderful opportunity for us to reflect, not just to remember what Christ has done, but to reflect on our own lives and the invitation and challenge that God makes to you to be a church of high invitation and high challenge. We first need to respond to the invitation from Jesus and the challenge from him. If you didn't receive the elements today, if you would raise your hand right now and you'd like to participate, we have ushers that'll come and bring those elements to you. At College Church, you don't have to be a member to participate in this moment, but we would expect that you have a relationship with Jesus. Maybe today you're beginning a relationship with Jesus. This would be a wonderful way, receiving communion would be a wonderful way to remember the day that you began a relationship with Jesus. If you have a child with you, we believe that you have the best discernment and judgment to know if that child is ready to receive communion today. Pastor Todd will come after we sing, but in these moments, I want to encourage you to think, God, have I said yes to you? Have I said yes to your invitation of relationship? And God, is there a challenge? Is there a challenge in my life I've been ignoring? I've been holding out on? Would you have the courage today to lay that down in front of Jesus and to take up the life that he has for you?